Lesson 6, Monday, December 12. So first part of today's session, today's class, is about reviewing and revisiting the conditional statements that we talked about last Friday. So the example we're going to use today is one of a password and checking first for the length of the password to be between 6 and 12 characters. So we started by looking at two different methods for writing this code. So we start the code by saying print enter password 6 to 12 characters, and we get the password back from the user in the form of a string. And we are not going to check that this is a valid string beyond the length of the characters. So let me actually save this, password.rb, okay, so that we get some of the syntax highlighting. And now what we're going to do is we're going to write a conditional statement to check the length. So we're going to do this in two different ways. The first way we're going to do this to say if the password dot length, so password is a string, so password dot length would be a number, should be the number of characters. If that number of characters is greater or equal to 6, then this is the first part of our check. We can say this is a valid password. And else, we can say it's an invalid password. This is not a full finished program because we haven't checked for the upper bound of 12 characters. But as a first step, we could do this. We could check simply to know that the password length is greater or equal to 6. Notice that this statement I'm highlighting, password.length greater or equal to 6, this statement must evaluate to a Boolean true or false in order for the if statement to function properly. As we just said, this is not enough. We also want to know that the password is less or equal to 12 characters. So which branch would we put that additional check in? Well, it doesn't make any sense for us to put it in the invalid branch, because when you get to the invalid branch, you know that the password is fewer than 6 characters. And so therefore, it can't be more than 12. So we're going to add the code that checks for the maximum length of the password right here. If the password.length is less or equal to 12, then it's valid, else it's invalid. And what you see, what happens now is that in order for the password to be valid, really two conditions must be true. The length must be greater or equal to 6, and then the length must be less or equal to 12 in order to reach the valid statement. So I can run this to make sure this is working. So if I put a very short password, it's going to tell me invalid. If I put a very long password, it's going to say invalid. Oops, I made a mistake. And the mistake is I put a put here instead of a puts. And my program, when I got to this invalid statement, actually crashed. So let's do it again. I fixed it. And it says it's invalid. Notice that I can actually add a little bit of information here. I know if you get to this part of the code that this else statement is only when the password is too long, whereas here it's only when it's too short. So if I rerun my code with a short password, it will actually give me a little bit of help as to what went wrong. So this is one way of writing this code with what's called nested ifs, an if inside of an if. There is another way that you can choose to actually write this conditional statement, or this set of conditional statements. I'm going to show you how. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all this code, and I am going to comment it out, meaning I'm going to turn the code into a comment so it's no longer executed. And the shortcut to do that is to select the code, to hold down the command key on your keyboard, and to click once on the /. When you do that, the editor automatically adds the command sign, the pound sign, in front of every line you wanted to comment it out. And now I can write my new way of doing this code. The way I'm going to do it this time is by using if and else if, and you'll see it's a different structure. It works the same way, but one advantage, if you want to call it that, is that I won't have to deal with nested ifs. It really becomes a question of style, how you want to write this code. So this time I'm going to say this: if the password dot length is less than 6, so I'm reversing the check for the length of the password. Well, if it's less than 6, I know it's too short. So I can say invalid, too short. And then instead of just doing an else here, actually I'm going to do an else if and check now. I know already that if I get to this part of the code that the length is greater or equal to 6. So now I need to check whether it's greater than 12. If it is, then I want to say puts invalid too long. And the else statement that comes after that would have to be only when the password is neither too short nor too long, and therefore is just right. This code works exactly the same as the first example, the first implementation. Some people will like this because there's more, if you want, of a symmetrical structure between the 3 checks. Some people prefer the nested ifs. It really doesn't matter. So if I try it again, password.rb, too short, too long, and just right. In class, we talked about adding another level of complexity to this password checking program, which was to say at least one uppercase character. And we said, this is kind of an interesting problem. There are lots of ways of solving this, of how you check there's at least one uppercase character, but we don't have a lot of tools yet for how to do that. And after a little bit of thinking and research, we decided that the way to check for that is to check whether downcasing the password led to the same string as the original password or not. So let's think about that. If there is an uppercase letter in the password and I downcase, then that uppercase letter has changed, and therefore password.downcase is not the same as password. In other words, the only way password.downcase is equal to password is if you started with all lowercase character. And if that's the case, then you know it's invalid. Need at least one lowercase char. So this is a bit of logic that's a little bit harder than what we've done before. So if I run it now and I say hello there, it says, no, you need at least, oops, sorry, uppercase. And this time, if I say hello there, it says it's valid. All right, that was it for conditionals. We started talking about loops, and in particular, we decided to work on the while loop today. So the idea of the while loop was to create a program that would ask the user for a number. So print, enter a positive number, and taking this number from the user input, from the keyboard, translated it to an integer. And what we want to do with that is we want to print on the line each number between 1 and whatever number n the user input. So what we did is this. We said number x is equal to 1. That's how we're going to start. And then we're going to use something that looks like an if statement but use a different keyword called while. And we're going to say that while x is less or equal to n, Notice the similarity with an if statement. X is going to start at 1, and for example might be 10. If 1 is less or equal than 10, so it's a Boolean statement, then and only then execute the branch, execute the code that goes underneath the while, which for us is going to be to put the value X on the screen and then add 1 to X to loop again. Why is it called a loop? Because let's say that n is 10. The first time you come around, X is 1, 1 is less or equal to 10, so you print 1 on the screen, and then 1 plus 1 is 2, so X take on the value of 2. But when the code reaches the end, it doesn't keep going. It loops back to line 4, and it checks again to see if we're done. So now 2 is less or equal to 10, so it will print 2, and X will be 3. And it will keep on going until X takes on the value 11. Then we'll jump back here and say 11 less or equal to 10. This is false. And at this point, Ruby knows that the loop is finished, and it will jump to after the end, where I can just say puts done, just to illustrate that it will get to that line only when it's totally done. So let's give ourselves a little more room, and let's say Ruby loop.rb, and if I say 10, it prints 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then and only then the word done. We then discussed the issue called an infinite loop, and the idea is that if I were to comment out this line of code, what would happen is that the X would no longer increment from 1 to 2 to 3 all the way to 10 or to 11 in this case. It would just stay at 1. So what would happen? You would check first 1 is less or equal to 10. You would put a 1 on the screen, but then on the next check, you would still check 1 less or equal to 10, and that's still true, so it would print another 1. I won't demonstrate because the loop would go on forever, but the idea is that there is this condition, this Boolean, cannot become false ever, because n is the number the user input, and x is a number which is always 1. So in your code, you always want to check for infinite loops by making sure that whatever condition you are stating is a condition that can be attained, in fact will be attained at some point through the looping process. This was lesson 6. Thank you for your attention.